week. And then our last one will be Alessandra Morrissey, Professor of Sociology, which will be May 1st in the Howard Boardroom. So, exciting moment, and hard to believe this is the end of the year. It's also hard to believe that Gratz is leading us. Co-founding member of the La Verne Academy, Jonathan Green. I think we were the last two standing of the La Verne Academy, first members. We'll give the introduction, but 48 years. Wow. I mean, great to have you as a colleague. And introduction, Jonathan.
Well, what an honor it is to introduce Professor Reed Gratz today for his last lecture, concert. Professor Gratz is one of the few people in the history of the University of La Verne to have been awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award, the Ellsworth Johnson Service Award, and is a member of the La Verne Academy recognized for his scholarship. This represents the trifecta of honors for teaching, service, and scholarship at La Verne. He is the ideal faculty member. Reed, So Reed's formal education was at Manchester College, sister La Verne Brother College, then New England Conservatory, and the University of Miami. His informal education includes composing and performing with the likes of George Russell, Herb Albert, Bruce Hornsby, Andrew Ford, and so many of his students, many of whom are also here, and his son. Reed was the university's very first Fulbright Scholar, and he received 2 such awards, teaching at the University of Innsbruck in Austria, and later at Leiden University in the Netherlands, where he was the Whitman Distinguished Chair of American Culture Studies. He also received a jazz composition grant from the National Endowment of the Arts and a research grant in African American music by the National Endowment for the Humanities. He has been on the advisory board of the American Jazz Institute and has been recognized as one of the 125 most influential people at La Verne's Centennial celebration. In addition to these achievements, he has served as longtime chair of the music department, and he's been a fierce advocate for the arts and for music at La Verne. He was largely responsible for the renovation of Morgan Auditorium, organizing Sundays at the Morgan Concert Series, and on the way has mentored so many faculty and students, many of whom are here. It's an honor to introduce you, and thank you, and we'll miss you.
fun. You know, it's we're doing this jazz style, so we talked through the pieces a little bit before. It was around 11:15, I think. We talked through and played a little bit of it, but it's fun to see what actually happens when you actually play the song. And so that was our debut. The name of the piece is Betez. And you know, it's as somebody tries to write music and get away with it, there's always a problem. You write a song and the title never comes first, for me anyway, you know, because I'm not writing something with lyrics that will give that title away, right? It's an instrumental music. So when I get done, I think, okay, I kind of need a title, and Opus 67 doesn't work. You know, that used to work. You know, for the real composers of that old tradition, and you know, they could just give it a number, but we can't do that anymore. So I like to pick places that maybe my family, my wife and I, and her son have visited. And so that one is called Betez. It was our favorite place in Turkey. And that was not a Turkish groove that we used. But let me introduce the people up here because they've given their time and they've worked on this music. I sent them the charts of the pieces and some recordings, and they could work at home with it, but they're all busy. And I want to introduce them first from left to right here. This is a very good buddy of mine for years now. He's a double graduate of La Verne. He had his BA degree, and I'm going to tell him, I think when you graduated would have been in 1980 when you finally finished. Was that right?
88.
I mean, your bachelor's degree.
Oh, yeah.
The bachelor's degree, okay. This is John Rothy. John was a student here. He left for a while, and we have our little tradition because, or our little story, because I had come here, I began here in 1977, maybe you already did the math, and that's the last century as far as I remember. But in 1977 and 78, a very good friend was our dean here, of John's and of mine. His name was John Gingrich, and some of you were here and remember him. And when I was here for a while, John Gingrich talked John Rothy into coming back and saying, well, Reed is here, and maybe you'd like to work with him. Sure enough, John started back in school, and I left for a year to Washington State. But maybe that's why you finished. You know,
Maybe that's why I'm not as good as I should be.
He's full of stuff. He did his master's and had a long and wonderful career as a public school teacher, a band director. He taught at the Mount Baldy School. He taught in schools in Upland and all over the place. And finally found his home as band director, music director out in Fontana, right? And middle school, and did a fantastic thing there. And is now retired, but he's always kept his own bands going, and he's doing that now. And so, John Rothy, thank you so much. John was also on the faculty here. Yeah, he taught music what was it?
Music and education.
Music, yeah, he taught music in the elementary school here for us. And then in the education, College of Education, you taught there for several years.
I did.
You did.
And
History of rock and roll.
I didn't learn that either. But in 73, I started at ULV. In 74, I started my first band, and we played on this stage in 1974.
There you go.
And we had this amount of audience when we performed.
That happens at La Verne sometimes. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for being here and kind of changing it up. I'm going to jump over here. This is a very good friend, was a wonderful student here. In fact, Jonathan Reed, who you just heard introduce me, brought him here. He met Tom Moose in Germany, and where Tom is from. And when Jonathan was there in Germany for a year, I believe, and he talked Tom into coming here to La Verne to finish up.
Almost.
And
Almost. There was a beautiful glossy, do you want to be an exchange student to promote a pizza And down at the bottom was a, for ULV exchange program, call Dr. Jonathan Reed. Handwritten, handwritten. And Pomona Pitzer's date had passed. And I called that number. He said, well, the deadline is tomorrow. I'm going to apply. That's how that happened.
That's a much better story. But it probably had the photo of the mountains.
It had a beautiful picture. I was like, yeah, I want to go there.
That's recruiting. So Tom majored in theater, did a lot of music here, and has had a career as a performer. He's out there playing in Disneyland and all over the world. He was in Germany and Ireland and all over the place. Every time I try to contact him, he's on the road or in jet lag or something. So Tom, thank you so much. Before I get to the next two fellas, let's play a song. This has another place name. It's called Kuala Lumpur. My darling wife Judith, who is sitting down here in the second row, and I had really a month there when we were first married. It was a fantastic place, and we were convinced that was the place for us. Well, we haven't made it back yet, but that's where we're going. So Kuala Lumpur. Do we know what we're doing here on this?
Yeah.
I remember I should always take the first.
You take the first.
Yeah, you got that one.
Had to get instructions there. So, what is it?
No, that Marcus said,
Yeah, we can see each other. We're okay.
You know,
Yeah, we're good. It's okay. We can see each other.
Can you turn on the monitor?
Yeah.
I can't hear you.
All right.
Not enough.
Let's see what happens there. It's not the most ideal place to play music. We've tried it in here a few times, but there's always problems with that sort of thing, trying to hear each other and do that kind of thing. So it's a little blind, but that's okay. All right, so I'm supposed to tell some stories, so I'm going to tell just one or two. Some of you who have been here as long as I have, that's probably a nobody unless Salman Isfahani is here. I don't know if he's going to try to make it today. But anyway, if some of you were here a few years ago, you remember our legend, one of our legends here, Roland Ortmeyer. And so the story I have to tell is from 1977, about October. I had been here for about 6 weeks. And, you know, when you're first here as a faculty member, of course you want to do everything right. You want to do more than you probably should. You want to make yourself shine a little bit so that you can come back the second year. And so I was in this office way down in the corner of the building. And I remember I had just come here from Miami. And I was wearing a parka every day. I thought it was the coldest place I had ever been. There was no heat, of course, in the whole building, I think, at that point. But I had my parka on, and Roland Ortmeyer knocked on my door. And I knew who Ort was. I read Sports Illustrated. And he had this very famous quote that was in Sports Illustrated that went something like this: "Our football team is so bad we couldn't gain yardage against tall grass." So that's what I knew of Roland Ortmeyer. Well, so he knocked on my door, and I of course invited him in. I was thrilled. And he said, "Now, is Jim Gratz your dad?" And I said, "Yes, he is. Well, my father was the athletic director and a longtime coach at Manchester College in Indiana, which at that time had a much closer relationship with La Verne as one of the brethren colleges." And so anyway, he said, "And didn't he coach the wrestling team?" And I said, "Yes, he did. Yeah, he did that for a lot of years." And he said, "And didn't you wrestle on the college team?" Now, I know I don't look like it now. But back in the days when my wife thought I was cute, I actually wrestled through high school and college. Okay, I know that's nuts, and if you know any college wrestling or if you watch that stuff, you think those people are insane. I agree with that. But my dad was the coach, and I had a great time wrestling on his team, and we had great teams at Manchester, and that was cool. But Roland Ortmeyer said, "Okay, so, you know, we need a wrestling coach." Now, what are you supposed to say to the legend? And you're in your first year. You say yes. So I coached wrestling here my first year. We had a very tiny team. We had just enough, though, to cover the weight classes, although our heavyweight, I think, weighed about 147 pounds, which is not quite the right size. And I knew we were in trouble because I could beat everybody, and I hadn't been on the mat for about 5 or 7 years. So we were in trouble. However, we did win 3 matches out of 8 that year. One of those wins came against, now, just believe me for a second, okay? USC did not have an official wrestling team at that point. They had a club. We called them USC because they came from USC. Well, we beat them. And I'm going to tell you how. The referee disqualified them because they were more than a half hour late from the game. We skunked them. And so, anyway, that's my wrestling story. Fortunately, there was another coach hired, a real wrestling coach, hired the next year, so I was able to weasel out of that position. But nothing like being a music faculty and the wrestling coach at the same time. So we move on here. Let me introduce a couple more guys here who are joining me. This is my very good friend. I know you can't see him from there, but this is Arnold Jacks on bass. Arnold and I have been good friends for over 40 years. Our very good friend Bobby Dominguez, who was on our faculty here for over 40 years, a great drummer who passed away just last year, kind of brought us together, I think, and so we've enjoyed out of this our friendship and playing together for many years. Arnold brought the very famous compadre Woody today. He's using the upright bass for your amusement and your thrill. So it's always nice to hear on Arnold. Our last member here, I just introduced him last because he's the youngest. He has to wait. This is my son, Joachim Marcus. Joachim plays drums and bass, and that's been part of my joy is to share music with him and also with Judith. Who during COVID decided she was going to play the bass. So we stuffed that in her hands and she's working on that. So we have our family trio. We played Baccalaureate last year. We're going to show up again this year. I hope Xander's not here. Oh, no, darn. But we're going to do that again. But Joachim and I get to play music every day. And it's something that I don't think we ever miss a day. He'll come walking out in the living room at whatever time he gets up. I've already been up for hours. And he'll say, unas tunas, which sort of badly translates to 1, 2. And so we end up playing 3 or 4. But we do that every day, and it's a great joy to share the music with Joachim Marcus. We're going to try to play this tune. I wrote a bunch of stuff all over it when I found out we were going to, when I decided we were going to play this, and I got out the green highlighter and the yellow highlighter and the orange highlighter, and I started marking things, and quick read what I wrote there. So we're going to see if we can get from the beginning to the end here.
I watch you.
Okay. If you hear me yelling something over here, try to yell at this. This is called. I had the audacity to try to learn a language in my 40s. Well, it's okay, I guess, but don't have great expectations unless you're a lot smarter than I am, which you probably are. But when it comes to languages, I've discovered I really am awful. My 4 years in Spanish in high school, that went nowhere, but I think probably because I was in a farm town in Indiana and had no one to ever. The teacher spoke Spanish, she was Cuban, and so I knew that there actually were people that spoke another language other than English, because she did. So I thought, okay, I didn't have to be convinced of that, but somehow those 4 years kind of melted away. And then the intermediate year I took in college, I survived that somehow. And in Miami, I sort of stumbled along with the many Cuban friends that I had, musician friends. And now I do pretty well when I turn on the radio and I hear this speed of Spanish that's on LA radio. I can sort of figure out what they're talking about. I can't figure out whether it was yes or no, but I can follow that. But my point is, I tried to learn Dutch when I was in my 40s. Now, I do fine when I'm in the streets of Amsterdam because everybody else is an immigrant there. And so we all make the same grammatical errors and bad pronunciation. But when I speak with my family, like my mother-in-law, if you want to test yourself for your second or third language or whatever it is, try talking to your mother-in-law who's a native speaker and you're not. And the pressure, you'll feel it. At least I do, and that's when I really fall apart. So anyway, this is in Dutch. It's called Wit haar, zachte wind, which just means white hair, soft wind. And I sort of wrote it about the love of Judith's grandmother. Moose on violin. What do you think? Tom's had a lot of adventures in his musical life, and he's one of those guys making his way through that very difficult occupation. And I'm very proud of you, man. You play so much. You know, he's also a great mandolin player and guitarist. Okay, here's a Tom Moose story. So I met Tom. He came here, and he came to my office, and he said, "I'm Tom," and he said, I play music, and from Germany. And I said, "Great, why don't you play for me?" And so we went over to the, I don't know if you guys know the music annex that we call the music annex. Okay, that was a Tasty Burger. Okay, some of you remember you ate there.
Tasty Free.
Tasty Free.
I'm sorry, no. This was the ultimate version.
Oh, shoot.
This was the super tasty freeze called Tasty Burger. That's a name that is held for the specialists. Yes, Tasty Burger. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I don't know how tasty it was up with the guy. Anyway, so we had converted that, and at that point, and so Tom came and he sat down at the piano, and I think he played some Bach. I think he played maybe a Bach invention or something.
Possible.
And I thought, oh, okay, we have a piano player here. And then he said, well, actually, this isn't my main instrument. You know, I play violin. I said, ooh, okay, well, play me something. And I think you had your fiddle with you, I'm not sure. Anyway, yeah, he was carrying
I haven't played it, but yeah.
I know. And he pulled it out, and some moths came flying out. No. But he played, and I don't remember what you played, but I thought, okay, this guy has, we can do something with this fellow. And then as we were walking out, he said, well, actually, you know, I play guitar, and, oh, really? And I have a rock band in Germany, and they're called, wait a minute.
Oh my God, you don't remember that. I don't
Something like, it's not Men at Work, but it's...
Workman in the building trade.
Okay, workmen in the building trade. That's translated to German, I don't know what that would be.
We found it in the dictionary. We couldn't agree on a name, so we
You know, there it was.
flipped the
That's
dictionary.
a lot of fancy people.
What does that mean? I don't know. It has a
Yeah.
word. It has a word in it.
So, oh, great. Oh, so you play guitar. Yeah, beautiful. And I said, well, gosh, you know, I hope you play in the jazz band, you know. And we've got everybody, but, you know, we don't have a drummer. And Tom says, oh, I play drums. So Tom played drums in the jazz band. The heck with violin or all those sissies.
Way more fun, right?
Yeah. So that's a Tom Moose story. I have another La Verne story to tell. Oh gosh. So some of you got the opportunity and the really great gift of knowing Jimmy Pascal. Now Jimmy was here on our faculty for a lot of years, and he was an outstanding coach. If you see all of those flags hanging for the women's volleyball teams that are up in the sports pavilion, Jimmy was the coach for probably all of those or most of them. And he was a very successful coach, and he was a good old guy from Alabama, I think. And one day Jimmy came and knocked on my door. And I thought, oh no, wrestling. No, the wrestling team, we were done with wrestling, that was done. He was the athletic director at that time. And he came and he said, Reed, I know you play tennis with your buddy Jack Meek. I said, yeah. We need a tennis coach. So, okay. Well, we were terrible. We were really bad. That's probably why they cut the tennis team out eventually. But you know, it was a great 5 years. I got a lot of chances to play tennis. My game picked up, and I had a lot of fun. The challenge there was that most of the years, everybody on the team, except maybe one, was an international student. And so, and this was during the time, some of you may not know, but we had the great honor of having the American Armenian International College here on our campus. In fact, what do we call it? Leo Hall was a building that college and those folks built. And it was a great joy to have so many Armenian students. I think I saw Agop here someplace you can fix, oh, they're right here in front of me. At one point, I remember the number 156 students. Now, that may be way off, but we had a lot of Armenian students here. And the beautiful thing for the music department is that the Armenian culture really values music. And so we had piano players coming out of the woodwork, you know, just, I think every Armenian student I met, yeah, well, I've only taken for 8 years. Okay. You still play? Well, I haven't played for a long time, like 2 weeks. But we really had some great students here. It was a joy. I loved that time period. My story was, they also played tennis. Now, I had the honor of reading names one year for the commencement, and it was during that Armenian time. So I had to practice all the time to get through some of those names. Sorry, it's my own ignorance. But so our tennis team was made up of guys not only from Armenia but also from the Philippines, and so we had names like this. And I loved introducing them because I practiced. And so you get to the next, you know, you go to the next school and you're there, you know, you're going to play. And the tradition is then that you're going to introduce the team. And I love doing that because, all those names just came flying out. And I had that nailed. It was also cool for our doubles teams because I put 2 Armenian guys together and I put 2 Filipinos together who spoke Tagalog. And so they didn't bother with hand signals that people use. Just tell them what you're going to do. You know, the other guys aren't going to understand it. And that worked. We got close to winning a few matches that. Before we go to our next tune, there was one situation where we were playing Caltech, and I said, "Come on, guys, we got to win this one. We're not playing we're not matching up with their IQs. You know, we're on the tennis team. You may not understand that if you don't know anything about Caltech strings." All right, this next piece we're going to play has become quite a challenge for me in my elder years here. Stuff happens to you when you get older. I see several friends out there and you're shaking your head like, yeah, this is no fun. You know, stuff like arthritis and hips and knees and all this, wow, you know, you get all this stuff. Well, I can no longer carry my gear very easily, but I got that guy over there to help me out. Pay him a little bit, you know, and then it works out. But I used to be able to play this tune. Now if I stop playing in the midst of it, you know, I'm having an arthritis attack in my hand. But I'm going to try to get through this. This is called Crescent Bay. This is for my wife, Judith. This is where we got married down in Laguna. It's a lovely spot. Maybe some of you know where it is. And it just seemed like an appropriate title for it. Anything we need to know here? There's a lot of yellow on this page. Okay. Well, let's just try it. John, you got the first syllable.
I do.
Wait,
Who
is
does?
it Tom or John?
I don't know. John, okay.
Yeah.
clock here. Well, my good friend Javier, he was an alum of La Verne. Great to see you here, man. It's been a long time. Gosh. This next piece I'm going to play, sort of, when I first got here, for several years, we had on this campus a real connection to the state of Indiana, where I grew up. There were all kinds of Indiana folk here. And things changed over the years. The demographic of everything has changed at La Verne. The size, well, the whole thing. And so when I put this next tune together, it's been a long time ago, I was kind of reminiscing about what it's like to be in a small farm town that's on a river with a small college, what that means to grow up in that sort of environment. And so as I thought about playing that tune today, it's a piece that I wrote called Indiana River. I like playing it because it's my mom's favorite tune. And but when I got here, I just want to mention a few of those people who had an Indiana connection. I saw Jay Jones come walking there a little bit ago, Indiana University graduate. Dwight Hannawalt, another legendary figure here, was an Indiana guy, Indiana University graduate. He always told me that Bloomington was his favorite town in the world, as Jay, and I sort of agree with that. There were, John Gingrich had gone to Manchester College. He knew what it was like to be by the Keenapocomoko River. I see my good friend Janice Huffman here, who went to Manchester College and was our choral director here. My first few years, a wonderful colleague and friend. Pat Weedoff is sitting over here someplace. I saw Pat a little bit ago. He might have had to run out for a class. But Pat is from a very small town in Indiana. Maybe some of you remember the name Dayton Root, who was a math professor here for many years. Dayton had spent a lot of time in Indiana, and there's a whole bunch of other people. I can't remember the name right now. I should have written it down. Of course I didn't. Others. Oh, of course, George Arnold, who was a physics professor here for many years, and if you got to know George, you knew and loved him, and several others. And so anyway, I'm going to play this piece.
Jack.
What? Oh, Jack couldn't see me, so he doesn't know it's me talking. This is my lifelong friend, Jack Meek. We grew up together in North Manchester. He, of course, was a fantastic professor here and left his legacy in the public administration department. It's a whole big program. Graduate program, so important here to the university. Served on there. I think you lost your opportunity for a last lecture, if I'm not.
No, I did last lecture.
You were able to do that because you were sort of a COVID guy.
I'm a COVID guy.
Yeah, so that didn't quite, that was a little different. Anyway, I know I'm skipping others. I can't believe I knew you were there. He just had Bob, well, thank you. He was the first one on my list, and I forgot him. Bob Neer, great friend. In fact, with Bob Neer, who of course was on our faculty for 50 years, I think. Bob Neer grew up in a house that I could see from my family's house off the back deck, and we talked about that many times. And so, there's a real strong connection to that area of the world. I'm sorry? I didn't know that. Okay, Kathy Erickson, there we go. Anybody else? Help me out here. Indiana River. What's that brain damage? All right. So I know some of you have something to run to. We've got one more tune left. I know I had more stories, but I don't think I want to tell too many. Some of you remember the old auditorium. Okay, how many of you were here to get the, yeah, a whole bunch of you. We had a lot of fun and a lot of anger in that room. Nothing really worked. You know, it was always fun to plug anything in, and you got this beautiful hum. Nick has worked very hard to try to get rid of that hum, but it's still sort of there. I don't know. Yeah. But there was a definite thing. If you plugged an amplifier into it, oh my gosh, you know. But that room opened, and it was built in 1926, the building, right? And I have photos from the opening convocation. You can find those photos pretty easy. Where in the fall of 1927, I guess is when it finally opened. And if you look at that photo, everybody is packed in there really tight because there were 510 seats in there. And now we have what, like 389 total balcony?
377.
Okay, there we go. That tells us how much larger we are today. Because in 1927, we could seat 510. Well, the first year I was here, the first year I was here, we did a performance of Handel's Messiah. Now, if you do the Messiah, you're going to pack the place. Okay, that's a crowd pleaser. And at that time, we had sold it out at 510 seats taken, plus about 25 or 30 who were standing along the side. We had an orchestra of 20 sitting in front of the stage. The stage didn't project out; it was back a little bit, so we had 20 people in there. The stage was totally packed with choir. I don't know how many were in there, maybe 35. We had, how many is that? About 600 people packed in that. Now, I don't know how many fire marshals. I don't think they did that in the late 70s. But anyway, that was a huge crowd. There's no way we can ever match that thing. But we had a lot of bizarre happenings in there. One of the things that happened that's quite memorable was during one of the choir rehearsals, and Janice could probably tell us a few stories too about that auditorium, but another choral director was in doing a rehearsal, and suddenly there was a big plop on the floor. Maybe there's anybody in here on that? No? Okay. A possum had fallen on the ceiling. had misstepped and it was on the floor and sort of staggered off the stage. You know, it's hard to kill those things. But he hit the floor apparently and flapped and then made it off the stage while the choir kind of just stared and nobody had the courage to go after him. But we don't know what happened. But he's still in there. I'm not sure. But you know, one of the main problems, of course, was that the ceiling leaked really badly. And one of our great heroes in the music department was Bob Matheson, who was not officially hired here, but gave his soul and his blood and his time to recording everything that we did here, and recording all of us individually who tried to do records and you know, albums, that kind of thing. Bob was a real giving kind of person with that. And I can always think of Bob sitting up in the front. He sat up in the front right, so the stage was in front of him. And it would be raining and raining in on his spot. And he would be sitting there with all of his equipment that he brought from home because we didn't have anything. And he would set up a table and he'd have his stuff there. And then a big plastic sheet, you know, construction sheet like, you know, Visqueen or, you know, plastic stuff. Have that over him and over the gear and doing the recording with his headphones on. He never got electrocuted or shocked. It was always a little scary.
Cursing under his breath.
Yeah, and cursing under his breath. That's true. We're going to wrap it up today with our last tune. It's called...
One second. You can't have the lecture without people interrupting you.
Oh.
I just wanted to say really quick, I'm so shy that I'll take this for the team. How eloquent and how generous you are, both musically and as a person, has helped generations of us do what we do. And I just wanted to, you know, standing in for so many people, express our deepest gratitude for you know, all the person that you are, the educator that you are, you make it sound like, oh, I walked in here and I knew all these things. I knew nothing, you know, and I credit you and so many people, both with how you are, more than even your vast knowledge of music. That too, you know, I didn't love the sharp 4 until I met you. Now I do. A lot, you know. It brought symmetry in my life. You know, musical joke. I truly think one of the things that every musician that tries to create their own stuff looks for is their own voice. And when you turn on one of your records, it's you. When you go to one of your concerts, it's you. Your voice has always been very clear. It's always been very strong. You always had something very, very profound to say. You would never shine a spotlight on yourself. You'd always, you know, spotlights on everybody else in the band. And so it's up to us to shine a spotlight on you.
we've got a big concert on Sunday. If you can come, it'd be great. It's at 6 o'clock in Morgan. We've got guys coming from Earth, Wind and Fire, Tower of Power.
Oh, will Reed be there? That's all.
Bruno Mars.
Reed will be
Will be
there.
there. You know, it'll be really special. It's free. Oh, and there's a reception afterwards, you know. Okay.